Edu Arctic2, Polar Research for Education, innovative program in Poland and Norway. Webinars.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Gabi Wagner. I'm a zoologist and I work in Tromsø in northern Norway. And I work with reindeer. And I'm going to start my screen now. Ille, can you see the screen? Or do
Not
you?
yet.
Okay, sorry. This one.
Now it's coming.
Okay, so this is a little video cut from very close to where I work. And these are semi-domesticated reindeer in northern Norway, and we'll use them as a little intro to the presentation. So I would like to talk to you about reindeer in a changing climate. First of all, what is a reindeer? Reindeer, the Latin name is Rangifer tarandus, is also called caribou. It's the same species. They're just called caribou in northern Norway, in America, and in Norway and Scandinavia, they're called reindeer. And here in Scandinavia, they're semi-domesticated, so they're being herded, but they live outside, so they don't live in stables, they live outside in the landscape, whereas in Northern America, they get hunted. Their conservation status is vulnerable. That means even though we still have good numbers of reindeer, they are in danger of becoming endangered even more because many of the wild populations are dying out very fast. The reindeer is a species of deer, as the name says, and it's the only one where both males and females have antlers. In this picture, you can see 3 boys with very large antlers. And there are about 15 subspecies of reindeer or caribou, of which 2 are already extinct. The smallest one, and I'll talk more about that later, is the Svalbard reindeer, which lives on Svalbard or Spitsbergen. And the largest one is the boreal woodland caribou. They are a gregarious species, and that means they like company. They live in groups, sometimes smaller ones, and sometimes very big ones of many thousand animals. There are populations that migrate very far. Others are very sedentary. The Svalbard reindeer, for example, barely migrates, whereas the longest seasonal migration of any land mammal of over 4,300 kilometers is undertaken by caribou. In Russia, we have the largest herd of wild reindeer in the whole world, which is, depending on how many calves they have every year, between 400,000 and 1 million animals. Whereas the second largest herd, the boreal woodland caribou, has been reduced by 90% already. And those ones you can find in Canada. Other herds are functionally extinct. That means there are still some individuals, but probably not enough to carry that population into the future. And some of them are basically we haven't seen in a few years. The reindeer have a circumpolar distribution, and that means you can find them all around the world around the North Pole. As I said, in the Northern Americas, they're called caribou, whereas in Scandinavia, Russia, and Siberia, they're called reindeer. But it's the same species, so it's the same animal. Arctic peoples have always used reindeer for food, for milk. They've used the antlers, the fur for clothing. They've used them for transportation and for building tents. So on the one hand, there were the wild reindeer that were being hunted, or the wild caribou that were being hunted. But then there are also the semi-domesticated reindeer. And in one of these pictures on the bottom here, you can see a reindeer herder in Finnmark in Norway who's lassoed a reindeer. And the domestication of reindeer is going back about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, whereas before that they've mostly been hunted until people learned to keep them in a herd and have them close by for convenience. How does a plant eater, a herbivore like the reindeer, survive in an Arctic climate where there is actually where there are very few plants to live on through most of the year? Hilda, I've got a lot of noise here from one of the people coming in. Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
Hello. Yes, I
Hi.
can.
Wonderful. We've already started, but it's nice to have you on board.
Sorry, we had some technical problems.
Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that. Right, I'm just in the middle of starting to talk. Maybe we'll go one step back so that you know which animal we're talking about. We're talking about reindeer and caribou today. And this is what a reindeer looks like. And you can find the reindeer and caribou in the Northern Americas and in Eurasia and Russia, Siberia, and in Scandinavia. And in North America, they're called caribou. And on the other side here, where it's red, they're called reindeer. But it's the same animal. They just have different names. So we'll talk about how such a large animal that eats mostly plants can survive in an Arctic environment where most of the plants are covered by ice and snow for most of the year. So we'll take one reindeer subspecies as an example, and that's the Svalbard reindeer. And it's a bit smaller than the other reindeer, but it's an excellent example of how they manage in the Arctic, because they live on Svalbard, which is the most northern distribution of the reindeer. They are very small, so they've got a good volume to surface ratio. That means they manage to keep the warmth they produce well within them. They live in an area where there's mostly snow most of the year and ice. They're plant eaters, and they have very short nose and small ears so that they don't freeze off. So they keep everything small and compact to avoid the cold catching them. They have very short legs, and they have the thickest fur of all the reindeer subspecies. The fur is very interesting. It gets very thick in winter, and then they lose most of it in spring and early summer, and they look really shabby. Then here in the top, you've got a Svalbard reindeer, and on the bottom, you've got a Eurasian mountain reindeer. So they're the same species, just different distributions. And you can see on the left, the bottom one is a Eurasian reindeer, and the top one is a Svalbard reindeer. So you can see the Svalbard reindeer has much thicker fur. And I've brought one piece of reindeer fur with me. Can you see that? It's like this loses a lot of hair. It's very thick and fluffy. And in winter, you can sit on this on the snow without getting a cold bottom. So it's very, very good insulating fur. And that means they can save all the energy they have, and they don't lose any temperature. So they can be outside in -20 degrees, and they don't shiver because they manage to stay warm just through their fur. And the secret to that is, on the one hand, of course, they've got lots of fur, they've got a lot of hair. But the other one is that each single one of these hair and the fur is hollow on the inside. So it's like each hair is like a vacuum flask. So they all have air pockets in there, and that actually helps to insulate the fur even more. Another cool thing the reindeer have is they've got really cool feet. They've got big hooves, and they make a certain clicking sound when they walk, and they have several advantages. On the one hand, they distribute the weight when they walk on snow, so they don't sink too far into the snow, so they act like snowshoes. In summer, when they swim through the rivers and lakes, they also act like paddles, like in a canoe. And in winter, when it's very icy, they can use the hooves as chisels, so they dig through the ice to get through, or through the snow to get to the grass that actually still grows in winter under the snow, so they find something to eat. Another cool thing with these feet is they are always cold, so the bottom, the underside of the feet has basically got 0 degrees, and that works by an counter-current heat exchange. And that means the hot, warm blood from the body, which has 38 degrees, is coming down into the feet, and it's running along the cold blood that is coming from the bottom up, from where the ice is. And the warm blood cools down, and the cold blood warms up as it goes up. And that basically works like a heat pump if you've got something like that in your house. So they don't get cold from having cold feet, but the coldness, if you like, stays down in the feet, and the blood that is returning into the body is already warmed up. So they save a lot of energy with that. The other thing they have basically the same system in their noses. So this is a reindeer nose cut open. They have lots and lots of chambers in their nose, and they've got a very long nose. And in there as well happens the same thing. The cold air from outside is being warmed up slowly in the nose, and it gets moisturized. And then they can inhale warm air, and the air that is being exhaled again is cooled down in the same place. And that means by the time the reindeer breathes out, the air is already close to 0 degrees again, and they basically do not lose any of their body warmth when they exhale. If you would go running in -20 degrees, you would very quickly get very cold just by breathing very hard. All the heat from your body would be exhaled out into the cold and disappear, so you would very fast get cold. But that doesn't happen to reindeer. So it's a pretty cool construction they've got, both in their feet and their nose. And that also means, of course, that they can keep all the water. If you run a lot, you breathe a lot, then if you or I would run in the cold, we would lose all the humidity from the lungs, and we would get very, very thirsty. And that, again, doesn't happen to the reindeer because they use their long nose with all the mucuses here, the skin that covers these chambers, to humidify the air, or rather take out the humidity when they exhale again, so they keep all the fluid inside. Other Arctic adaptations, on the one hand, they can reduce their energy requirements. When it's winter, they plainly need less food, and that is regulated by their brain. The other thing they do is, of course, they maximize all the energy they can take from their environment. That means mostly that they make the most of the summer. They eat 24 hours a day in the Arctic summer when the sun does not set, when there are plants. A reindeer calf can gain about 6-7 kilos per month in the summer. So they grow really, really fast. They eat around the clock, and they change their whole digestive system, which grows to make the most of all this food that's available. And of course, they're very picky eaters, so they're very particular about which plants they want to pick and want to eat. So they only take the richest, nicest plants that will give them the most energy. So they don't bother with any rough hay or straw that they find, because it wouldn't be enough to build up all this energy. They reduce the energy use in winters, so they move very little, they sleep a lot, and they plainly deplete all the fat stores which they've gained. So they get very fat in autumn and summer, and then in winter they plainly use up these fat stores. And then they lose a lot of weight, of course, during the winter. But that is not the sign that they're starving. That they do that even if they have food all winter long. So their body is programmed to use up fat in winter. And then, of course, because there isn't much food in winter, they change their digestive system again. It all shrinks, and all the bacteria that live in their stomach become less and less. And that alone changes their weight already, because there's plainly a few liters less of stomach in winter. And then one thing they love to do is they like to eat lichen. Lichen are poisonous for most animals, so don't ever try to eat lichen. Most of them are poisonous to us, but reindeer can eat them. And to them, it's like candy floss. They really like it. It's mostly sugars and carbohydrates in there, so it's fast food, and that sort of keeps them going through the winter. So as long as there are lichen about, they're unlikely to starve. And here is a picture of a reindeer calf here in Tromsø that feeds on these lichen. We'll jump this one. So just to recap a bit, the Arctic adaptations on the one hand mean reducing energy requirements. You spend as little energy as possible during winter, and you maximize the energy extraction. So you try to get as most energy out of the environment when it's there, which is in summer and in autumn. And then, of course, to make use of the energy that you've eaten in summer, you need to store the energy. And this is a butchered reindeer, and you can see here, this is sort of the upper leg and the bottom. This is where the tail would be. And this here is just the fat that this reindeer has produced in the course of a few summer months. It's usually 2-3 months when they manage to eat a lot. So the whole back is covered in a pillow of fat, and that's what they're using up in winter. So one thing that helps the reindeer to survive in winter is plainly the fact that they're big. They have room enough on their body to have all this fat, which saves them through the winter. And then they have one more very cool adaptation to the winter. In winter, in the Arctic, the sun does not rise, so the sun is always below the horizon, and that means there's very poor light. And one thing the reindeer do is they change their eye color. So in winter, they get blue eyes, and the eyes become more sensitive. You've probably seen this when you shine into a cat's or a dog's eyes, the eyes start to flash in darkness, and reindeer have got the same. So the light is coming into the eye, and it's also reflected out of the eye like with a mirror, and that means they get twice as much light than we would get, plus they can see the light even better in winter by turning their eyes blue, so they become more sensitive to light, and that of course helps them not so much to find food, but rather to see predators like wolves, wolverines, or bears coming. So they see really well in the dark winter months. All these adaptations, the getting fat in winter, losing the fat over the winter, growing antlers, the fur that they get in winter, the very thick winter fur, all this is controlled by a biological clock. And that means reindeer have evolved to do certain things at certain times of the year when it's best suitable. So their brain controls and their genes control when they get fat, when they lose fat, when their fur grows, when their antler grows. And that has evolved over 10,000 of years. But now the climate changes very fast, and the times when it was good to have a thick winter fur may soon not be the right time anymore. So that means climate changes faster than the reindeer can evolve. And that means their internal body clock does not fit with the environment anymore. So their clock is running at the wrong pace for their environment. And this is called a timing mismatch. So the internal time of the reindeer doesn't match the time in the environment anymore. And that can lead to a lot of problems for reindeer. How does climate change affect the Arctic? We have a very fast rate of temperature change in Arctic regions, probably more than 7 degrees Celsius. Just for comparison, the climate agreements that have been arranged in the civilized world are usually address temperature changes of around 2 degrees. So in the Arctic, it's changing much faster. We have much shorter winters than we used to have. And what's more, the winters have become much wetter up here in the Arctic. So we get more snow, and the snow is more heavy because it contains more water plainly. And then we have a lot of rain on snow events that used to be quite unusual, but now it's becoming more and more frequent. That means you already have winter, it's snow, and then suddenly it starts raining again. And that means the whole snow gets wet, and when it then gets cold again, that water freezes. And that means on the snow you have a layer of ice, or sometimes directly on the ground, on the plants, you have a layer of ice. And that means that the reindeer can't get through the snow anymore. You remember we talked about their hooves being able to dig through the snow to the plants. When there's a layer of ice, they can't do that anymore, because their hooves are made for digging through snow and not for digging through the ice. I'll show you pictures for that later. And then, of course, climate change also causes warmer summers. It plainly gets hotter in summer, and that means a lot of plants are growing much more. New plants are moving into the Arctic. We're getting more and more forests where there used to be only bushes, and the whole vegetation changes. And remember, I told you that the reindeer are very picky eaters. They only choose the best plants that have the most energy for them. And now those plants may well disappear. So the whole menu for the reindeer is changing. Another thing that comes with warmth is insects and parasites. So we get more ticks, we can get more mites, we can get more flies, and they can disturb the animals, of course. You know how annoying it is when you're covered in flies. That is also annoying for reindeer. But what's worse, that a lot of these flies carry, or ticks carry, diseases which make the animals sick. The dry summers can also lead to more forest fires. It's a huge problem in Siberia and Russia, where a lot of the pastures, all the land where the reindeer live, is being destroyed by enormous forest fires that we haven't seen at this frequency before. And then a huge problem here in Scandinavia is, of course, the Arctic is becoming more and more industrialized. So there are more and more people living here, more and more houses are being built. People go out a lot more into nature. We have snow scooters driving everywhere, new roads, railway stations, huts. So the environment where the reindeer live and used to be undisturbed is being built down and is being industrialized. So they plainly lose the place where they live to the people. Here's what I was talking about before. So this is an example of reindeer, and you can see the herd is trying to dig through the snow, and you can see in some places they have dug up the snow already to eat. But when you get rain on this snow, then you get a layer of ice, and you can even have several layers of ice if there are several episodes of rain in the winter. And we had that 2 years ago. We had a catastrophic winter, and in Finnmark in the north of Norway there were up to 7 layers of ice covering the ground, and the reindeer were starving in the thousands because they couldn't get through the snow anymore to find food, and the government had to fly in food for the reindeer with helicopters to make sure they're not all dying. But a lot of animals died anyway in that winter. So really catastrophic when we have rain on snow in winter. Another thing is that reindeer calves are usually born onto the last snow of the winter. So when they're born, there is still snow, and that's fine. They're well equipped to deal with that. They've got this lovely reindeer fur that we've seen earlier. So it's usually not a problem. But if it rains and their fur gets wet, it loses its properties. So the fur then clings to the skin, and it doesn't save the reindeer from the cold anymore. So when these calves get wet, the fur doesn't protect them from the cold anymore, and they plainly die of cold. So the rain is double dangerous for the reindeer. On the one hand, they haven't got food in winter, and on the other hand, it kills off the calves in spring when they get wet. And then we talked about parasites. Some of these parasites have been here all the time, for example, the deer cat, but they were less of a problem. But now when it gets warmer in summer and when there's a lot of rainfall, then we plainly get so many more of them, and that means that the reindeer are more likely to get ill from them. There is one parasite that is moving northwards, that's the brainworm, which is a parasite that goes into, as the name says, the brain and makes the reindeer very sick, and they die from that. And then there are, of course, the ticks with all their viral diseases. We rarely seen them in the north of Norway before, but they're becoming more and more frequent. So even people with dogs and cats are noticing that this is an increasing problem, and it's even more so for the reindeer. So a lot of nasty diseases. There's one, for example, which is a bacterium that causes the mouth to basically start dying off, and it can also affect their feet. That's something that we get with climate change. And it's also something we get through stress. So reindeer can get sick of that just when they're stressed, for example, because there are a lot of building activities in the area where they live. So there's both the climate and the stress, and the climate change can also stress the animals if they just don't find the food they need, or if they have to retreat into smaller areas. So that's when you get a lot of sick animals. So what we need in future to help the reindeer through climate change is, of course, climate action. We have to take action to stop the warming up of the earth. We need space. Very often there are very strong local changes in one area, but the reindeer can maybe avoid it and just migrate to a different area. So what they need for that is the space to move. So we have to give them more space so they can avoid the areas where, for example, the snow is frozen in by ice. So they can just move to another area which is maybe has only got snow, and where they can dig through to the plants. We need time. We have to make space in time for them in order for them to adapt to the new challenges, and maybe the herds have individuals in them that can adapt better to the new climate and the new plants and the new areas. So the herds have to develop and evolve with the changing climate, and some animals will do better than others, but this is a very slow process that takes probably hundreds of years if we have that much time. Researchers are, of course, helping where they can. They're trying to understand what we can best do to save the reindeer in a changing climate. We need to protect them. We need to help them actively, not just study them. And of course, we shouldn't forget there is a huge knowledge base of reindeer herders that have basically studied reindeer for the last 2,000-3,000 years and longer. They know absolutely everything about reindeer and how they move in the landscape, what they like to do, what they don't like to do. The reindeer herders know a lot more about the reindeer than researchers do, people like myself do. So we need to listen to them and have to hear what they have to say, and because they are the people who are best equipped to understand how the animals will react to changes. So the traditional knowledge is something that we have to take into account to help the reindeer in future. And with this, I'm at the end of the talk. Thank you very much for coming in, and I'll stop my
Watch other recordings from webinars on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/EduArctic. Edu Arctic2, from polar research to scientific passion, innovative nature education in Poland and Norway receives a grant of 240,000 euros received from Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway under EEA funds.